I still remember the sound my tires made pulling into the driveway that Wednesday evening. Gravel crunching under the truck, radio still playing low. Absolutely normal day, nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just another guy coming home from work thinking about leftovers and maybe mowing the lawn before the weekend. Then I looked up, and my stomach dropped so hard it honestly felt like I missed a step on a staircase. The trees were gone. All 6 of them. 80-year-old red oaks, massive trunks, thick canopies that shaded my entire backyard every summer. Just gone. Not trimmed, not damaged from a storm, not half dead after lightning or something. Cut clean down to the stumps like execution style. Wood chips covered the grass. My fence line was suddenly exposed to the entire neighborhood. Sunlight hit the back windows of my house in a way it never had before, harsh and ugly. And sitting there like some kind of smoking gun was a tree service truck parked halfway into the lot next door. I just stood there staring for a second because your brain does this weird thing when somebody crosses a line so insane, you almost convince yourself you're misunderstanding reality. Like maybe I forgot what my own backyard looked like. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe those weren't my trees. Then one of the workers walked by carrying a chainsaw and snapped me right back into it. I walked over and asked, probably calmer than I should have been, "Who hired you guys?" The crew foreman wiped sweat off his forehead, pointed his thumb toward the neighboring lot, and said, "Owner next door." Just like that. Casual. Like we were discussing lawn fertilizer. He even handed me the work order when I asked. Signed and dated. By Caleb Mercer. Now, Caleb had only bought the empty lot 3 months earlier, but from the second he showed up, you could tell he was one of those guys who treated neighborhoods like monopoly boards. He wasn't moving there because he loved the area. He was building a statement piece. Modern concrete box, giant black windows, minimalist landscaping that looked like a dentist office parking lot, the whole thing. And attached to him constantly was his architect, this skinny dude named Adrian who dressed like he was auditioning to play European villain number 3 in a Netflix thriller. Black turtlenecks in 90-degree weather, expensive sunglasses, drove a matte gray Tesla like he was trying to communicate with dolphins through pure arrogance. First time I met them, they were standing near the property line taking measurements, and Caleb asked me, smiling that fake country club smile, if I'd ever considered cleaning up the oak trees. I laughed because I honestly thought he was joking. I told him those trees were on my land. They'd been there longer than either of us, and I liked them exactly where they were. Caleb nodded politely, but Adrian looked at those trees the way a guy looks at a support beam he wants removed from a remodel. Like eventually they'd have to go. Apparently, eventually meant while I was at work on a Wednesday. So I walked straight over to Caleb's rental house and knocked on the front door hard enough to rattle the frame. He answered holding a glass of red wine. No joke, like some suburban supervillain relaxing after a productive day. I didn't even say hello. I just asked, "Why did you cut down my trees?" And this man, I swear to God, shrugged. Then he took a sip of wine and said, "Well, they were hanging over my lot. Leaves everywhere, roots too close to where the foundation's going." Like he was explaining why he returned a defective toaster. I told him those trees were entirely on my property. He paused for a second, tilted his head, then hit me with this smug little line I'll never forget. "Are you sure?" That's when I realized this wasn't an accident. He thought he could play dumb after the damage was already done because in his mind rich people mistakes are temporary problems solved with checks. I told him I had a property survey proving every single tree sat inside my boundary line, some of them by several feet. He smiled again, man, that smile, and said, "Well, they're gone now. Nothing we can really do about it, right? Sorry for the inconvenience." Inconvenience. Like somebody spilling coffee on your shirt, not destroying 80 years of living property because it blocked the view of your future kitchen island. And right there, standing on his porch while this guy swirled wine like he was in a luxury condo commercial, something in me changed. Because some people think being calm means being weak, and Caleb had just made the mistake of thinking I was the kind of neighbor who'd let this go. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where people outside the US, and honestly a lot of Americans too, completely misunderstand how property law works. Folks think if a tree hangs over your yard, you somehow own part of it, you can cut it, remove it, do whatever you want. Absolutely not. According to standard procedure, property lines are everything. Doesn't matter where the branches lean, doesn't matter if leaves fall into your yard. Doesn't matter if you personally believe the tree is ugly or in the way. If that trunk is rooted on somebody else's property and you remove it without permission, congratulations. You may have just upgraded yourself from annoying neighbor to defendant in a timber trespass lawsuit. And here's the part guys like Caleb never seem to understand. Mature trees are insanely valuable. We're not talking about Home Depot saplings for 49 bucks. Old-growth trees affect property value, cooling costs, erosion control, privacy, shade. Courts take that seriously, especially when the removal looks intentional. From a legal perspective, the second he hired that crew without verifying the survey, he stepped into dangerous territory. But honestly, the legal side wasn't even the most interesting part to me. The psychology was. Because this is a psychological trap rich, entitled people fall into all the time. They confuse confidence with immunity. Caleb genuinely believed that if he acted casual enough, if he minimized the damage enough, I'd subconsciously follow his lead and treat it like a misunderstanding instead of a violation. That little shrug, the wine glass, the sorry for the inconvenience line, that wasn't random. It was dominance theater. He was trying to establish social control by acting like the decision had already been finalized emotionally. And to be fair, that tactic probably works on a lot of people because conflict is exhausting, lawsuits are expensive, and most neighbors don't want war. But me? I grew up around contractors and land surveyors in rural Tennessee, and one thing those guys taught me early is this: never touch another man's trees, fence, or driveway unless you enjoy financing somebody else's retirement account. The lesson here is simple. Arrogance makes people sloppy, and sloppy people leave paper trails. Caleb thought he removed a landscaping problem. What he actually did was create evidence. The second I got back inside my house, I pulled the property survey from the folder cabinet in my office. I didn't pace around angry, didn't call friends to rant, didn't post online about toxic neighbors like half the internet would do now. I just sat down at my kitchen table under the harsh sunlight those missing trees used to block and started building a case. Because once emotions cool off, paperwork becomes weapons. And Caleb had handed me plenty of ammunition already. The survey from when I bought the property back in 2019 showed every single oak tree clearly inside my lot line. Not barely inside either. A couple of those trunks sat nearly 7 feet onto my side. There was no ambiguity, no honest confusion, no weird survey overlap. Somebody either ignored the property markers completely or decided they didn't matter. I grabbed my phone, walked outside, and photographed everything: the fresh stumps, the sawdust piles, the exposed roots, the damaged grass where heavy equipment rolled through my side yard. Then I went back to the tree crew. Funny thing about contractors, they'll tell the truth real quick when they realize they might end up dragged into court. The foreman suddenly got very cooperative. He admitted Caleb specifically instructed them to remove all 6 trees because they interfered with the sight line of the future home. Sight line. Imagine destroying 80 years of growth because your future living room wanted better sunset aesthetics. The foreman even emailed me a copy of the signed work authorization later that night. That was the moment I knew Caleb wasn't escaping this with a fake apology and a gift card to a nursery. The next morning I called my attorney, Russell Pike. Russell was one of those old-school Southern lawyers who looked permanently annoyed even during casual conversation. Suspenders, reading glasses halfway down his nose. Office smelled like coffee and old paper. I laid everything out on his desk. Survey, photos, work order, timeline. He looked through it silently for maybe 2 minutes, leaned back in his chair, and let out this low whistle. Then he said, "Well, he's cooked." Those were the exact words. He explained that in our state, intentional destruction of trees on another person's property fell under timber trespass statutes, and depending on intent, courts could award multiplied damages. That's the kind of law most suburban developers don't think about, because they assume timber laws only apply to logging companies deep in the woods somewhere. Nope. Trees are property. Expensive property. Russell sent Caleb a formal demand letter within 48 hours requesting compensation for the destroyed trees, restoration damages, legal fees, everything. And for about a week, silence. Then Caleb's attorney responded, "Oh man, I still have that letter somewhere because it reads like satire." They called the incident an unfortunate misunderstanding between neighboring property owners and offered to replace the trees with 6 decorative saplings. Decorative saplings. I remember laughing so hard I nearly spilled coffee on the letter. Russell laughed too, except his laugh sounded dangerous. He said, "These people think a mature oak tree is interchangeable with landscaping from a strip mall parking lot. We hired a certified arborist after that. Now, if you've never met a professional arborist, imagine a botanist mixed with a forensic accountant. This guy walked the property for hours taking measurements, calculating age, assessing environmental contribution, replacement value, species rarity, the whole thing. His report came back brutal. Each tree was valued at roughly $26,000 based on maturity, health, species, and contribution to the property. 6 trees, over $150,000 gone in a single afternoon. And because the removal appeared deliberate, Russell believed the court might support enhanced damages. Suddenly, Caleb's little landscaping shortcut turned into a financial grenade. That's when the intimidation tactics started. Caleb began parking construction equipment near the property line early in the morning, workers blasting music, random, accidental debris ending up near my driveway. Childish stuff. One afternoon, he actually walked over while I was checking my mailbox and said, "You know this is getting blown way out of proportion." Out of proportion. I looked at him and said, "You cut down 6 80-year-old trees while I was at work." He rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. They were just trees. And there it was, the sentence that explained everything about him. To Caleb, the world existed in terms of utility. If something blocked his view, slowed his project down, dropped leaves, cast shadows, occupied space, it had no value beyond whether it benefited him personally. Guys like that always think money is the only scoreboard that matters until they run into somebody who cares more about principle than convenience. Once the lawsuit officially hit, things escalated fast. Depositions, expert reports, property assessments. Caleb's attorney tried every angle imaginable, claimed the property line markers were unclear, claimed the roots threatened future structural integrity, claimed the tree crew may have misunderstood instructions. But every argument collapsed under evidence. The survey was crystal clear. The arborist testified the trees were healthy and structurally sound. The crew foreman confirmed Caleb explicitly ordered removal of every tree along the line. Worst of all for Caleb, the emails surfaced during discovery. That was the real killer. In one email to Adrian, the architect, Caleb literally wrote, "Once those trees are gone, the house will finally breathe." Man, if you're planning to commit property violations, maybe don't create poetic written evidence about it. The trial itself lasted 3 days. I'd never been inside a courtroom that much before, and let me tell you, real court is way less dramatic than TV until suddenly it isn't. Most of the time it's paperwork, objections, procedural discussions that sound boring as hell. Then one moment lands like a hammer. For me, that moment came during Caleb's testimony. His attorney asked whether he intended to damage my property. Caleb leaned back confidently and said, "I believe the trees were effectively shared because of their location." Then Russell stood up for cross-examination carrying the enlarged survey map. Calm as ever, he walked right up to Caleb and asked, "Sir, can you point to the property line?" Caleb did. Then Russell asked, "And can you point to where the trees were located?" Caleb hesitated. Whole courtroom got quiet, because suddenly everybody could see it. The trunks weren't close. They weren't borderline. They sat clearly inside my property. Russell waited maybe 2 seconds before delivering the line that probably ended the case. "So, when exactly did my client share ownership of trees located entirely on his land?" Even the judge looked irritated after that. Then came the arborist testimony. This guy explained in painful detail how impossible it was to replace 80-year-old oaks in any meaningful sense. You can plant new trees, sure, but you can't replace decades of growth, habitat value, cooling effects, privacy screening, stormwater absorption, all the invisible things mature trees contribute to a property in a neighborhood. That hit the jury hard because suddenly this wasn't about landscaping anymore. It was about permanence, about somebody deciding another person's property could be erased for convenience. Caleb's attorney kept trying to push the mistake narrative, but mistakes usually involve uncertainty. Caleb had certainty. He just ignored it. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for about 4 hours. Longest 4 hours of Caleb's life, probably. He sat at the defense table staring at the floor while Adrian kept whispering nervously beside him. No smug smiles anymore. No wine glass confidence. Just sweat. Finally, the jury came back. They ruled overwhelmingly in my favor. The court awarded compensatory damages plus legal costs, enough to completely derail Caleb's construction financing. Not movie star millions, but enough. Enough that the banks backing his build suddenly got very nervous about continuing the project. Turns out lenders don't love active judgments hanging over luxury developments. Within months, construction stalled entirely. Contractors disappeared. Equipment vanished. The empty lot sat there half-cleared, exposed under the brutal summer sun with nothing but dirt patches and caution tape flapping in the wind. Then came the final twist. Caleb couldn't cover the full judgment, so he was forced to sell the lot. But because legal claims and liens were still attached during the process, development got tangled up for months afterward. Nobody wanted the headache. The property just sat there, empty, silent, dead. Kind of poetic when you think about it. He destroyed the trees because they interfered with his dream house. And in the end, there was never any house at all. Sometimes karma doesn't show up screaming. Sometimes it arrives as an overgrown vacant lot everybody drives past wondering what happened there. You know what's funny? People hear stories like this and immediately focus on the lawsuit, the money, the revenge angle, but honestly, that wasn't the part that stuck with me the most. The real thing that stayed with me was how fast somebody can destroy something they didn't build. Those trees survived storms, droughts, decades of changing neighborhoods, probably kids climbing them back in the 70s before I was even born, and all it took was one impatient guy with enough money to rent equipment and enough ego to think property laws were more like suggestions. That's the dangerous mindset right there. Not wealth, not development, entitlement. Because there's a difference between improving land and believing the world around you exists purely for your convenience. From a legal perspective, Caleb absolutely deserved to lose that case. Honestly, he was lucky the judgment wasn't worse. Courts tend to hammer people when they intentionally alter somebody else's property, because if they didn't, neighborhoods would turn into war zones overnight. Imagine if everybody just removed fences, trees, drainage systems, or landscaping every time something annoyed them. Society only works because boundaries mean something. Property lines, consent, mutual respect, boring concepts until somebody ignores them. But psychologically, this story's even more interesting. Caleb never thought of himself as the villain. Guys like him rarely do. In his mind, he was probably the rational one, the ambitious homeowner trying to improve a lot while dealing with an unreasonable neighbor emotionally attached to trees. This is a psychological trap people fall into constantly when money enters the equation. The more resources somebody has, the easier it becomes for them to confuse preference with authority. They stop asking, "Can I?" and start asking, "Who's going to stop me?" And most of the time, nobody does. Which is exactly why people like Caleb become more reckless over time, because arrogance reinforced by success starts feeling identical to intelligence. Until one day reality finally pushes back. According to standard procedure, disputes between neighbors are supposed to go through communication first. Surveys, mediation, written agreements, permits, all the boring adult steps designed to prevent exactly this kind of disaster. But arrogance skips procedure because procedure feels slow, and entitled people hate slow. They think consequences are things that happen to other people. The lesson here is pretty simple. If somebody shows disrespect toward your property, your time, your boundaries, don't match their chaos with more chaos. Document everything. Stay calm. Learn the rules better than they do. Because calm people with evidence are terrifying in a courtroom. And honestly, the empty lot next door ended up teaching the whole neighborhood something. For 2 years, people drove past that patch of dirt asking what happened there, and every single time the story got retold, it became less about trees and more about hubris. About what happens when somebody believes money automatically outranks respect. Maybe that's why the whole thing still gets under my skin sometimes. Not because I missed the lawsuit, but because I missed the shade. I missed looking out my kitchen window and seeing those branches move in the wind. Some things really do take generations to grow and only minutes to destroy. So now I'm curious, if you were sitting on that jury, would you have ruled the same way? Or do you think Caleb deserved another chance? Let me know in the comments, because neighbor disputes like this happen way more often than people realize, and trust me, some of them get a whole lot uglier than this one.